Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, with attention in the Tory media being as much on the problems that the Tories face with Reform UK as Labour, I'd like to discuss how I think that this challenge to the Conservative Party, one which they've never faced before in 200 years, is largely of their own making. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So the chair of Reform UK, Richard Tice, has insisted yet again that the party will be standing a candidate in every seat in Britain. He's been joined by his old muckers from Brexit Party days, Ben Habib and Anne Widdecombe, with the former saying that he only agreed to reform the old gang on the basis that there will be no deals with the Tories this time. Tice has said that it is his aim with Reform UK to destroy the Tory party. In reality, I don't believe that. But I do believe that he has no reason to do a deal with them at this election. In 2019, their deal propelled the Tories into a majority government, so it was effective, and it led to the UK leaving the EU, something which they wanted. So they could justify that decision even if they don't like the way their own policy turned out. But if they stand aside in Tory seats at the next election, neither of those things really happens. You know, they would end up looking foolish. And foolish in two ways, really. First, they'll have broken their promise to stand against the Tories in 2 consecutive elections. Who's going to seriously believe them a third time? So their entire reason for being would disappear if they did that next year. Secondly, it wouldn't stop Labour winning a majority. It would just reduce the size of it. So given that they can't actually influence the binary result next time, as in who forms the government, only the scale of it, there's no strategic point in standing down. Except I still remain unconvinced they have the infrastructure to select candidates in every seat in England, Wales and Scotland without ending up with some embarrassing skeletons coming out of closets during the election campaign. As far as I can tell, they haven't really selected that many candidates. You know, Labour and the Conservatives are basically finishing off. Reform UK, they've just got a handful. So it sounds to me, if there were to be an election this May or April, they'd have to get a hell of a rush on. And I think there'd be an awful lot of embarrassment. But that's on them. I did wonder if they might justify standing candidates down in particular Tory seats, because they could justify that. You know, for candidates they approve of. It's like for various Tory candidates, well, you know, you like, for example, people like Liz Truss or Suella Braverman, they could say, well, you know, we approve, or Simon Clarke even might make a difference for him. We approve of your policies. We think you're good MPs, so we'll stand down for you, but, you know, stand against, say, moderate Tories. They might have done that. Because I think their purpose is not to destroy the Conservative Party, but to continue its infection. You know, and do they really therefore want to cost the seats? Because they could cost the seats of some who are basically on their side. You know, in opposition, parties of government usually have to reflect on their failures more honestly. They don't usually do it straight away, but after they've lost another election or so, they tend to say, right, we need to get serious here. You know, this is the phase that Labour are in at the moment. Back in like 2005, it's the phase that the Conservatives went through. I think Reform UK want to keep them crazy in opposition, pursuing the same fallacy that the hard left do with regards Labour. All we have to do is maintain control long enough for the government to fall, and then we can do what we like in power. It's like oblivious to the fact that actually to get into power, governments don't just fall. You have to win the election as well. You need to appeal to swing voters, not just wait for the passage of time. Granted, the fallacy is less ridiculous for the right wing because they have their media machine poking at government, like the public opinion. But it is still a basic fallacy. But anyway, we'll see what Reform UK end up doing. But I am prepared to believe that they genuinely want to stand candidates everywhere. I'm just not convinced they'll be able to, not without a big mess. But they are very likely to cost the Tories seats and make it harder to address their weaknesses in opposition. And it's partly the Tories' own fault. They have enabled Reform UK just like they enabled UKIP. They didn't have to. Without wasting a lot of time going over the parallels, let's look at the here and now. The Conservatives fear Reform UK, and they especially fear Nigel Farage joining up with them for the election. In fact, and I've commented on this before, they are more focused on the threat from Reform UK than they are from the threat of Labour. It's like they're amplifying the threat from Reform UK, and they do represent a threat, but they're amplifying the nature of that threat, and they're somehow diminishing the nature of the threat from Labour. And you can tell this because they're constantly going, oh no, we need to try and get Nigel Farage on our side. Oh, what if he were to join Reform UK? That would be disastrous. And yet with Labour, it's like, oh, it's a soft lead. People don't really like Keir Starmer. So they're diminishing the threat from Labour and amplifying the threat from Reform UK. And yet they're not doing anything about them. With Labour, the Tories attack their leaders. They make false claims about them. They make false claims about their policies, make false claims about their previous record in government, their current record in Welsh government. It's a daily attack on Labour. Now, that makes sense because Labour are their main challengers. They also find time to attack the SNP and the Lib Dems because these parties are challenging them in individual seats in the general election as well. But then you look at the way they deal with Reform UK. They're challenging them for a lot of seats. They're not going to win those seats, but they're going to stop the Tories winning them. Where are the attacks on Reform UK? Where are they pointing out how unrealistic Reform UK's policies are? The conflicts of interest that notable figures within the party have. Why isn't the Tory smear machine pointed at Reform UK with both barrels if they fear them so much? And they had the power to do this. They had the power. It's now tricky. The monster is now unleashed. You might imagine that because much of the toxic mainstream media is owned by people who want the Tories to take the Reform UK line, the Tories, if they wanted to sort of avoid that, ultimately can't do much. It's like, they're the ones dancing to the tune of the media rather than the other way around. But that isn't the way it has to be. Because it was the Tories who failed to implement media reform 10 years ago when the public were actually clamouring for it. That helped UKIP present their first challenge on their right flank in history. They've not only continued to fail to implement these reforms, but they've actually made further strategic blunders. First, they've actually promised to remove what few of the Leveson regulations were implemented, giving a green light to our rancid media. Second, they have prevented Ofcom from taking Talk TV and especially GB News to task over obvious breaches of conduct. We have this disparity in the media regulation in the UK. So broadcast media is held to a much higher standard than print media. It's simple to explain. It's because billionaire Tories own the print media, not all of the broadcast media. But GB News are getting away with some fairly obvious breaches. They're being found guilty. They're so obvious that Ofcom have to find them guilty, but there's no punishment behind it. This is ridiculous. GB News is basically the media wing of Reform UK. The Tories could and should have given Ofcom the teeth to deal with them. And the third blunder is trying to pursue Reform UK-like policies in government. Labour trying to be austerity light didn't help them under Miliband, and being Brexit light didn't help them under Corbyn either. By pursuing Reform UK style policies on immigration asylum, watered down, for example, they're just highlighting their own failures to the public because they're keeping these policy issues in the news. But because they're failing by their own metrics, it amplifies its importance amongst voters and highlights just how badly the Tories are managing them. If you look at trends for health in pink, the economy in orange, and immigration asylum in purple on this tracker of most important issues, this is specifically for Conservative voters. You can see immigration asylum's top of the tree, but it's in third place for all voters. We switch that to all voters. It's clear daylight. Essentially what's happened is that the top issue for Conservative voters is not the top issue for most swing voters. The ideal strategy for a political party is one which aligns the main desires of your core support and your target support. The Tories have done the opposite. And it's their fault, it's entirely their fault. Immigration asylum have been a relatively low concern to even Conservative voters. It was ramped up over the course of this Parliament as a result of a relentless focus in the news. But it couldn't possibly be a daily news issue just because Richard Tice or Nigel Farage has got something to say about it. It's become a daily news issue because the government have made it a key issue. They shouldn't have done. I keep saying, despite their public attacks on immigration, right-wing economics absolutely relies upon a lot of immigration. It means you get to spend less money on education, healthcare and pensions. They attacked Labour for increasing immigration when they were in power, but the proportion of the population who are foreign-born now is way higher than when the Tories took over in 2010. The Tories are very pro-immigration, just not publicly. And if you've got to adopt different positions on a policy in public and private, then the last thing you want is immediate focus on it. The Tories have trapped themselves by making sure the brightest media spotlight is on this policy that ideally they would have no one talking about. And they've done that. They should have suppressed all talk of immigration in the media. And they had the power to do so in a way that Labour simply don't. You know, they had multiple powers available to them. First, they could have just adopted functioning policies on immigration asylum. The small boats issue needn't have happened. You know, this record net migration figure needn't have happened. You know, the huge backlog, asylum backlog, needn't have happened. Having to find ridiculous accommodation or, you know, or the talk of hotels needn't have happened. None of this need have happened. They created that. Second, if asked about their policies in interviews, they could have just fallen back on the old political trick. Oh, you're talking about voters don't really care about that, do they? Voters are much more interested in X, Y, or Z. Why aren't you asking me about that? You know, and the Tories would get away with that, and again, in a way that the Labour simply wouldn't, because the media is set up to support them. When push comes to shove, they're set up to support the Conservatives over Labour. Conservatives could just face the media down if they tried to go down that line. Third, if the media continue to try and push things, you just threaten them with more regulation. Oh, I don't think you're really reporting in the public interest. You know, we should order another inquiry and see. Well, they could have implemented Leveson in full. They had that power. They could have at least held it over the media. The Tories don't mind playing dirty. Why not? Fourth, granting licences to outlets like GB News, who were from the start obviously going to amplify issues in the media that the Tories did not want amplifying. It was as clear as day. It's incredible that the Tories counter the threat from Labour in all the usual ways, by both fair means and foul. Yet their response to both UKIP and its Brexit Party and Reform UK successors has been consistently one of appeasement. They never attack them. They allow them to break electoral and broadcast rules. They attempt to pursue common policies, even though it just makes it easier for Reform to say, well, it's not working. The Tories are weak or incompetent, depending on how you look at it, because those policies are not working. Our policies would actually work. They wouldn't, of course, but they're not in that position to prove it. You know, this Reform UK problem, which is presenting the Tories with a split on the right wing of politics, which simply didn't used to exist. The Tories have always been so successful because they had the right wing sewn up and they focused their entire attentions on fighting for votes in the centre, whereas other parties ate each other's votes. So the Tories now are facing that problem where they've got votes being split in their happy place. And it is a problem entirely of their own making. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.